Everyone, I am here with your favorite mycologist, or the mycologist
amateur
that you
mycologist. I'm not trained.
Well, okay. Humility aside, your soon-to-be favorite amateur mycologist,
Yeah.
Jesse Noller of the wonderful Humble Fungus, previously known as The Killing Joke.
Yep.
Which we will talk about because I'm interested in how those two have, from Killing Joke to Humble is quite the continuum. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But Jesse, thank you for hopping on. I know we've had a little bit of a pre-brief here, but it's nice to actually virtually meet you at this point. I know we've
it is nice to meet you.
Direct messages and Twitter for quite some time, actually, through COVID and years past. It's one of those things. But
how many years have we lived in COVID?
I think we're going on about a millennia at this point. I got to be honest. I've lost track of time. Somebody keeps on going. It's the 90th or the 1000th of March, 2020, and I feel kind of bad about it because I don't know. It's the year that keeps on giving, and I don't mean in a good way. So let's start with a little bit about you. So give us the 90-second who is Jesse and what the hell are you doing around this place?
Oh my God. So 90 seconds working backwards. Currently, I'm a principal program manager at Microsoft. That's my day job. I'm currently on leave with that for various depression and actually like carpal tunnel issues. So I've been on leave from that for a little bit, but other than that, in the tech world, I'm a distributed systems engineer, Linux systems engineer. My specialty is extremely complex, extremely large distributed systems running Linux. That's my sweet spot. That's been my day job since I was 18. Now 40. So
been a while.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I spent most of that time making other people rich and not myself. So that kind of sucks. But anyways, working backwards, I work for Rackspace on OpenStack, a bunch of open source dev advocate. Also built a product called Karina, which was a really badass container runtime that I miss. And then before that, worked for a lot of tech startups in the distributed system and distributed storage and complex operations space. So been around the tech block a bit, but yeah, most recently I've turned into part gardener, part mycologist, part like maker.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a fun run, and I've got two daughters, 13 and 9, and they're the light of my life. They're over on the coast. Unfortunately, because of COVID, I haven't been able to see them since last Christmas. Yep. That sucks. But the light of my life. Got 3 dogs. Got 6 chickens. The chickens are new. Got those back in March. Yep. Back before I realized COVID was going to be COVID, and now I have chickens and I love them, and they're glorious. And I sat outside trying to have a meal outside last night, like on my patio, and they were jumping up on the patio table trying to take my stuff, and I'm like, this is anarchy. So
anyway, some people associate chickens with anarchy. I mean, I'm thinking there's games, or is that the geese? The geese are definitely anarchists.
During this entire COVID thing, I was really trying to work on, I needed my Antifa army. And I figured if I made the chickens little Mad Max battle armor, I could have my chicken Antifa army, and we could start just mixing some stuff up. But come to find out, chickens don't like clothes.
No.
Anyways, so.
I'm glad you tried that, and I don't think I don't
you
know where that would have ended up.
Okay, so the story behind that is you browse Reddit, and people are always making little hats and things for their chickens, and I can't even get the identification rings on mine, right? It's like you're supposed to put these little rings on their ankles, and I'm just like, okay, no, I don't feel like
I give
dying
up.
today.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the key word there is Reddit. So if you see it on Reddit, you may be going down a tremulous path. So,
So yeah, so other than that, it's like I said, it's been a lot of tech startup, a lot of Twitter, a lot of Python, open source community, things like that. It's been a fun run.
that's good. I mean, I certainly have. That's where our initial intersection was definitely in the tech side. Now, you got to explain to me why mycology. I mean, of all the things you could
Okay,
do, and you could tie
so
this to your local
this,
community or whatever you
yeah,
want to.
so
But
this is, I'm going to have to work backwards because it's sort of the way my brain works. But if, well, let's pause and rewind to say, a couple of years ago, I was working for Rackspace. I was working from home, pretty isolated, super depressed. It was just a tough situation. Really super depressed. I wasn't leaving my house. I wasn't, so basically before COVID was cool, I was living like COVID down in Texas. And I can honestly tell you that shit will drive you nuts. Yeah. And so, I mean, think about the isolation we have now and just take that rubric and look at the last decade of my life. And that's basically COVID life has been my life.
Wow.
And so I'm there in a bad spot. Ended up applying. I really wanted to work for Microsoft. They had some of the best Kubernetes people that I knew, some of the best systems engineers that I knew, and I really wanted to give it a shot. Moved up to Colorado, and really the move to Colorado, the new job, and everything else like that kind of hit it hit an intersection in my brain where I kind of started to realize how bad I was, and I had fallen into the alcoholism well 5 years ago after the divorce. Yeah. Right. And 6-7 years ago now after the divorce, and pretty bad alcoholism. I was what you would call a high functioning distributed systems alcoholic, meaning it's, drink as soon as you get home, wake up the next day, run 3 miles, go to work, Yeah. And so here I am. I'm in Colorado. The place is beautiful. It smells like home. It feels like home. It's covered in plants. The people are different, And so I took that moment, got into some new doctors, started working with my therapist, my psych, and others, really started taking my mental health seriously. And I had already been very open about mental health. Yeah. And very public about my struggles with it. But this was sort of like, okay, so I've given you this much information. Now I'm going to give you this much information. Sure. And the reason why is because as I was sitting there looking at all of this, I realized that the thing that I wanted most of my life was community. And what I mean by community is connection, meaning. In other words, when you're working with, when you're going to the doc and you're talking about your feelings and everything, they talk about it's not, sex or drugs or hugs or this or that you're seeking. Yeah. Especially as somebody who's had a traumatic childhood and life as I have. Yeah. You're looking for deep connection. And growing up, living all over the place, moving all over the place, living like a nomad most of my life, I've never really had that. And so there I am, finally crawling out of depression and alcoholism and some bad medication a really shitty doctor put me on. And I'm crawling all out of that. And I say one day, it's like I'm looking around my house and it's covered in artwork and I've got the dogs and this and that and everything. And it's like, it's filled with bullshit. And I say, I'm still sad. I'm working through all of this stuff, but I'm lonely. I started growing plants, right? I actually went down to a nursery and got a couple of orange trees. for my daughters. I was going to grow those for them. Those died, but that's the story. But started growing houseplants and started. I've always been a bit of a biology and sociology and science geek, right? Like the natural sciences make sense to me because systems make sense to me. Like if I can understand a problem or a person or a sociological, trend as a complex system, then it just clicks for me. And so plants, I'm like struggling with them. I'm getting, fungus gnats. I'm getting spider mites. I'm building terrariums. All of a sudden, I went on a phase where I still have quite a few of them, carnivorous plants, right? And so I've got 2-3-year-old Asian pitcher plants downstairs in my kitchen that keep hitting my face. And so I'm growing all of these things, and I've got greenhouses set up in my house, and I'm volunteering at Lafayette, the community food share in Lafayette, Colorado. Sorry.
Yep.
And I was volunteering there, and they said, hey, one of the things that we need for the food bank is this grow row thing. And I say, grow row, what's that mean? They're like, well, we'll give you a bunch of seeds. And I'm like, I've got a bunch. And I'm like, if you need seeds, I'll get you seeds. And I did. I spent a couple hundred of my own and went to hit up a family member in Amish country and buy. They're like, we need a couple thousand seeds. And I was like, here's several pounds. Right. And
tens
so
of thousands. Here you go.
Yeah, tens of thousands of seeds. And so the volunteers are just like, what? Like, are you going to help sort these? And I'm like, nope. So I'm there at the food bank, and then I say, well, I've got the space. My girls aren't around. This is January, February, March, right in there, super early in the year, and early December too. And so I just go on Craigslist, and this is Colorado, so everyone is growing, weed and everything else in their houses. So I bought a shit ton of equipment, dirt cheap.
I bet.
And I had tents and tents and tents of plants. I had fungus gnats. I had failures, etc. So while all of this is going on, of course, my internet recommendations are changing from tech and everything else like that. And I say, okay, what can I grow inside that I haven't grown inside yet? A buddy of mine who's in, the agriculture industry here, he's like, dude, I just went to this, store down in Denver, and I got this like little grow kit, and it's for mushrooms. And I'm looking at this thing, and it's a plastic tub with a box of dirt in it and a mister. And I'm sitting here staring at this, and I'm like, okay. And so I go on Amazon. And this is how things usually start for me. And I'm skipping a pretty significant piece in here just to focus on that separately. But next thing I know, I bought a couple of oyster mushroom grow kits off of Amazon, and I've got this little plastic tub. And I say, okay, well, I'm growing mushrooms. How can I grow more mushrooms? Because I'm an engineer, God damn it. So the next thing you know, I've got 3 64-gallon Sterilite tubs, and I have what's called substrate. It's really just sawdust and dirt and everything all over my freaking kitchen. And at one point, I actually had it on my ceiling, because one of the things you have to do is sterilize everything and use a pressure cooker. Pressure cookers require you to pay attention.
Yeah, a little bit.
If the bag so you have to use plastic bags in some of this, and so if the plastic bag inside the pressure cooker melts, then you will get a hot stream of stuff coming up and out of. Anyways, so there I am.
Important life lesson there, folks. Watch your pressure cooker.
So there's a reason why I have stopped using it inside, and I now use an electric one with auto shut off.
Oh, there you
go. Duh. Anyways, so there I am growing these mushrooms, and then it's fast forward, and all of a sudden, what I realized with fungi is it touches on, let me pause there. So community, connection, donations, and what I really wanted ultimately growing all of this stuff and growing these mushrooms, growing these vegetables, et cetera, was to give back, but also it's rewarding, right? It's rewarding it's rewarding in a way that I've never been able to connect to in my life, which is I'm growing food, I'm growing something significant, I'm growing something that matters. Mushrooms come and go, like mushrooms are magical.
I know where you're going with that. Yes, there are the magical mushrooms.
God, that's another story. Anyways,
yeah.
But Colorado is strange. Anyways, there I am, and it's like fungi are magic, and I'm watching these things colonize, and then I start studying things like, mycelial connections in the forest. I start looking at, the significant, my plants are dying. Why are my plants dying? Well, it's because they don't have the mycelial connections that would give them an immune system in the wild. So, what I do is I take a little bit of the oyster mushroom substrate that I've got, and it's growing and everything, and I put it in my houseplants, right? And my houseplants suddenly start going like gangbusters. Wow. And I'm sitting here, and the scientist in me, that little boy who's sitting there staring at dirt and wondering what dirt's made out of, and staring at chickens and wondering what chickens think, right? That little boy is sitting there going, holy cow, these things appear overnight. They require nothing, right? You make the substrate, it's at a certain moisture, and then it's just going to push out mushrooms, right? They're magic, and they're tied to everything. And if you fast forward to like climate change and the things that we're staring down, lack of food crops. Mushrooms have exponential expansion. Every stage in fungal development is an exponential expansion point, right? So I can take one spore and I can make a million more. I can take one agar plate, and I say agar because I learned it reading. None of you science people say ogre. anyways, so salty. But I can take one agar plate. And so I make my mushroom spawn, basically baby mushrooms. I make them in 1-quart jars. And if I slice that agar plate up the way that I usually do, I can turn that agar plate into 4 quarts of mushroom spawn. I can turn that 4 quarts into 100 quarts of mushroom spawn. I can turn that, it's like, each step of the way, you could do 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5 expansion. And so from a food crop standpoint, it's extremely efficient. It's vegetarian, it's vegan. It grows on waste products. Like I'm using straw, I'm using sawdust, right? And so just from a pure science standpoint, and then also ecological standpoint, right? It's the rise of the temperature that we see with global warming. It's causing a lot of these fungi and a lot of the trees that rely off of these fungi. It's causing them not to be able to make these mycelial relationships. And so what we see tree death because of disease, beetles, etc., where the trees would have been able to fight that off if they had the mycorrhizal relationship with the fungi that they needed. The fungi die off, right? And the fungi are basically what keeps us from being ass deep in detritus, right? They consume the lignin inside of tree cells, etc. And so why it's all about that connection. And mycelia, what I realized is like my urge for connection tied so much to this mycelial connection of fungi, like reaching out and connecting and trying to do a good passive thing. And that rings well to me.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, for lack of a better way of putting it, you're anthropomorphizing, mushrooms or fungi into your common human experience. And that's a beautiful way of doing
but
it.
what if, and so this is the interesting thing, because fungi predate us. We actually share more RNA with fungi than we do with plants.
Oh, there you go.
So that's why fungi are in their own kingdom. So if we are more closely related to fungi than we are to plants and animals, or plants specifically, if animals are more mammals, are more related to fungi than plants, then that sort of begs the question of, is it anthropomorphic? Am I applying our rubric onto the fungi, or am I just saying, oh wait, the fungi is the rubric we already inherently instinctually developed?
Yeah. There's the great existential debate of, I mean, yeah, exactly. I'm gonna throw my hands up and go, hey, you know what? I'm not smart enough this time of day to even count.
Yeah, no, you're talking to the man on this first cup of coffee. It's like, oh.
I'm like 2 or 3 in at this point. So I love how you're going all the way back. Forget, I think it was Frankl talked about man's search for meaning. What we look for, as you tie that to community. I think, similar paths. I'm divorced as well. I went through my journey with that too. And a lot of that was finding meaning, finding connection, who I am as a person, and connecting that into what's around me, who's around me, how do I relate to those, or how do I not relate to those? And it's still a struggle.
How do you live in the moment?
Yeah, well,
right.
Precisely. If I like my fingers sticking up in the air and gonna go, okay, which way is the wind blowing? Am I going to allow myself to be carried by that, or am I going to
living in the moment, staring at the wall? Like, it's.
We all have our things.
It's hard, and then I think the, if you imagine my life as the Earth and just the sphere spinning in space. The atom or the comet that hit it was getting diagnosed with pretty severe ADHD now going on a year and a half ago.
Yep.
And I kind of view it as like the before time and then the after time, right? Getting the diagnosis was unemotional. It was sort of the bullshit, whatever, I don't think so, etc. And then I start talking to like family and friends. They're like, yeah, we thought you were being treated for this for decades, dude. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean your parents didn't do anything? What do you mean the doctors never gave you anything? I'm like, oh my God. So I get on medication, I get treatment, go through a lot of therapy. And all of a sudden, my superpower is now all of a sudden I've got emotional control. I've got emotional regulation. Not all the time. It's a lot of hard work. Yeah. It's like there are good days and bad, but going from the inability to like really dig in and care about things and really, connect, etc., and going from that to all of a sudden, being able to smile again, being able to focus, having good days and bad, but being able to see the bad for what they are.
Yeah.
Right. And so I took that ADHD, and it's like, there's a great book. I think it's called Organizing Solutions for People with ADHD. And one of the chapters on it, it actually talks about, the ADHD addiction cycle. Because people with severe ADHD, we go through addiction cycles. We go through hot and cold. We hyper obsess. Yep. Like I could very easily fall in a well where I just mentally obsess about that dry erase marker until the point I'm suicidal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, that kind of going from that to all of a sudden being like, I can smile, I can live in the moment, I can not hyper obsess on things, or, as the book says, I can take that obsession and direct it at something.
Yeah.
And so about 6 months ago, back in March, April, May, so right around May, June, or I want to say June is when I went on leave. That's when I don't remember where I was, but the thought hit me of, hey, things suck. And things suck for reasons completely beyond my control. Tech is problematic. we want to change the world, but we keep making it worse, right? We keep marginalizing, minimizing, we keep, giving Nazis platforms. And, no matter what we do, like tech seems to be two things: selling infrastructure to capitalists and throwing gas on a fire. And so it's like, at the end of the day, I'm sitting there and it's like, does any of this really matter? And how can I channel, I've lived my life to work like that. Every part of my life before I got my ADHD and my depression and everything else treated, the only reason I got up in the morning was to work. Like that was like I could drink myself to sleep, get up the next day and go to work because that's what the world was.
You were
and
living
now
the work. Yeah.
Yep. And now it's like I can go and I can grow food and vegetables. I can give things to people who need it. I can, I can connect with all this, and then I can also apply my tech knowledge.
Yeah.
Right? I can say, hey, one of the funny things about fungi is that they grow fast and they die fast. So if you failed, plants take a while.
Yeah.
Like just straight up, vegetables will wait months before they just up and croak, right? A mushroom's like, the fungus is like, okay, we're good, but we're done.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not happening. But it also requires a lot of patience. And so it's this nice balance between I can A/B test a formula for a substrate, which I'm going to do later today, and I can A/B test agar plate mixtures or cultures. But then I can also apply things like, oh, look, I need to do data analysis at scale. Well, I can throw up Bigtable or something else like that, right?
Right.
And so that does give me a bit of an advantage with this. And so when that epiphany hit of, I need to connect what I do and I need to accept that about myself. In other words, I have to be able to emotionally connect, and it has to be something that isn't going to do me wrong. Right. Yeah. It's always that thing of, if I'm going to trust you and I'm going to open up to you, you can't stab me in the back, bro.
Yeah. Right. Don't do me dirty.
Hey, don't do me wrong. And so that's where it's at. Now it's at the point of, start this business, go help people do this stuff because it's rewarding, it's needed. Yeah. And even if I put myself in, I have blew all my savings doing all of this. It's like, even if I put myself at risk, it's still worth it.
Yeah. Fulfillment.
Right. And that's the great thing. It's like, if I wanted to today, I could go and drive a pile of mushrooms down to the food bank and load them up onto somebody's car. Yeah. And I mean, imagine being, and I said this, I was interviewed by NPR, and I said this, like, imagine because I've been there at least. Imagine going to a food bank, and it's a place where you typically you can get grains during the summer and during growing season, but usually they're on the edge, right? Yeah. They're not going to be the best. And then a lot of canned foods, a lot of frozen foods, and trust me, it's like Community Food Share down in Louisville. They do God's work, and they do so much, and they get some of the best food that they can.
Yeah.
But imagine being one of those people, and they don't ask questions, right? The food bank doesn't ask questions. They don't ask who you are, right? You could be our Senator Cory Gardner, showing up, and they wouldn't say a word.
Yeah.
Imagine being one of those people and then going home and opening up like half a pound of oyster mushrooms, right? Fresh oyster mushrooms. It's like,
yeah.
I know not everyone loves mushrooms, and I know a lot of people don't know how to cook them, don't know how to eat them. But still, at the end of the day, it's like, if you're a mom or a dad and you're sitting there and you're trying to make soup or something else like that,
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be able to use what, the gifts that you've been given, right? The skills and abilities, like you're saying, you're engaging your technical brain, of course, but you're also doing something that's, that both from your own personal journey, having been there and done that, you're giving it back to the people that need it the most, regardless of the actual item that's going there, right? Yeah, I mean, like you say,
it's an individual redistribution of wealth.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's basically the middle finger in the face of capitalism to begin with, right? It's using the infrastructure, because we like to use that word, but it's using the infrastructure for doing good as opposed
realizing that all of that's a lie too. Like coming to grips with that over the past year has been awful.
Yeah,
like realizing that capitalism is just this weird fever dream to keep people in place and keep the boot on their neck. I'm like, y'all, you need to go back to the French Revolution, because the entire conservative philosophy is predicated. Never mind. Like,
there's a lot of feet being on necks, if you will. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, and that's sort of like the problem of I've done a fair amount of classical schooling, like sociology and anthropology and everything.
Sure.
And just looking around, you're just like, oh God.
Well, history is doomed to repeat itself multiple times, if I may be so bold. But so let's actually talk a little bit about the humble fungus, right? So it started as, you want to explain a little bit about the Killing Joke name? Because
so what it is
that was intriguing to me.
I do not do things in order, right? It's sort of an ADHD thing where I will try something and fail at it in a much shorter time scale than most other people.
Sure.
And so the Killing Joke, the Killing Joke is a couple of things, and people know it from the band, they know it from the comic book. It's a Batman comic book where it's really dark, and for me, the Killing Joke is actually sort of a personal, cynical view of the world, right? Mm-hmm. It's sort of a last laugh, and so what I said was I wanted a business, and I picked a cool name. And that's it. That's about as far as I, thought. And it's like I could do really great iconography. I could pick up like really great fonts, do a simple design. People won't mind it that much. Then I launch. Then I start getting some feedback, and it was really polite. A lot of people, believe it or not, and this actually bugged me. A lot of people were afraid to tell me that it bugged them, and that hurt. But at the same time, I just simply understood it and I accepted it.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, let's go down the name ideas. I sat there for weeks racking my brain and going through permutations and trying to find the domain name. And because fungi and tech and mushrooms and everything all have this weird overlap, there's a lot of the domain names are just take. Right. And they're all squatted, etc. And I'm like, okay, fine. Finally, I started going around and I said, okay, you could pick an abstract name. I wanted something with fungi or mushrooms in it. I want the domain name. And then I'm like, and I want kindness, right? Killing Joke was just fun, right? It was just supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
But I want to get across the fact that I want to get these grow kits in with kids in schools. I want them to be able to see and learn and firsthand witness like this magical process of these mushrooms growing.
Yeah.
And I really want chefs to be able to like have this in their restaurant sitting there growing. And I want, other mushroom producers. It's like the list goes on.
Sure.
And in order to do that, I realized it's like I have to be accessible.
Yeah.
Right. And accessibility is a key thing. And you may not think that a name can have accessibility, but it can, right? If you name something, and welcome to 2020, if you name it Whitey McWhitey or Whiterkins, right? It says pretty much what it says on the tin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're predisposed at a certain point to the inevitable.
And so if you're somebody who has a history of depression or suicide or something else like that, and you see Killing Joke, it's going to trigger you. And it's like, I didn't think of these things. And partly it was, I needed to launch, right? I needed something. And you've got to be willing to like destroy it. And I think that's one of the things that has helped me for better or for worse is through this entire process, growing mushrooms, going from not understanding really fungi last December to now,
Yeah.
having a business, I have failed a lot. I have had contamination. I've had issues where I've had to break everything down, clean it, and throw it out. I've had days where I wanted to light everything on fire and burn it to the ground.
Yeah.
And I've spent tons of money failing, and I've spent tons of time failing. But at the same time, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like I can view the name as a failure, or I can view it as, okay, well, I now have a data set.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Something you reference point against. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I now have a data set. I now understand it. It's like the humble fungus plays a lot better. It's a lot more accessible,
Yeah.
and it's a lot more connected to me. Right. And it feels better when I say that. And when I say that name, and people respond well to it. And that's ultimately what I wanted. Right. I wanted people to be able to connect and see this magic and be able to explore it. And by just changing the name and the brand, if I can make that better, then I'm going to do it.
Well, I mean, you're exemplifying the exact name of your business, right? It takes a lot to be able to be humble enough to admit that some things are mistakes, like it's
generally speaking, I assume I'm the one that's wrong in the room. I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, maybe it's on fire.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit, tiny bit, smoking at least. But at least you got, I mean, a lot of people can, especially in the space of, starting your own business, right? There's a level of hubris, a level of, it's called pride. And it's at times arrogance that, hey, this is me. I mean, I have my elemental collision thing right behind me, right? Like that was probably similar to you as, I think this is pretty good. I like the idea of things colliding together and coming up with it. But it's approaching that stuff in humility in the same way that you've your story through this entire conversation has been. A lot of what you're talking about is that foundation of humility. It's understanding that you're fallible. I'm fallible. We all are fallible in ways that we can't even understand at this point.
We're all bodies broken in weird ways. And
you're going to make me get out the, I got it. You're gonna make me get out the mosaic because I always talk about mosaics. Like this exemplifies. It's actually better in this hand. It exemplifies it, right? This picture is formed by bits and pieces of broken glass.
Well, and it's funny too,
can't be any separate from that.
One of the things that I've studied too is, psychology and ego death and things like that. And when it's funny because if you take the human brain and you look at it evolutionarily, the last thing that formed was our ego, like the part of the brain down here that holds your ego, your sense of individuality and self, right? And this is why, psilocybin, other magic mushrooms, LSD, and other drugs like that have been used to treat PTSD, severe depression, and things like that. Right? Because what happens is that we as humans have our ego, our sense of self, our sense of this is the reality, this is my place in it. And if you have a very strong ego narrative, apparently, it's if you have that really strong ego narrative and then all of a sudden you have that ego stripped away, that's why people have psychotic breaks when they're doing drugs like that. And it's fundamentally because we, as we've evolved, we talk about narcissism a lot in our society. Narcissism is just a different word for a really overbuilt sense of ego.
Yeah, egocentricity.
Right? Egocentricity. Yeah. And so it's from a humility and everything else, like tying this all together. It's like you look at the ego and I don't know. It seems to be the root of so many of our issues and problems. Yeah. And it's not just 2020. It goes back even further than that. It's like that ego, that fragility, that inability to take, a single ding against that ego armor of yours. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it's like ergot, right? Ergot is where LSD came from. Right? And it's a fungus that grows on wheat. Imagine being And they suspect the Salem witch trials may have actually been caused by ergot poisoning. And the reason why is because imagine being somebody like your typical male back then who's, walking around, he's got his gun, women stay in the kitchen, and all of a sudden you eat a bunch of tainted meat and your ego vanishes and you start tripping balls, right?
Yeah.
You're going to think that your wife probably is casting spells on you, right?
Yep.
Because all of a sudden it's like your sense of self is gone. You were floating weightless in the world, right? And it's like thinking about that and thinking about like that fine line between what we construct and the reality. It's like if you take the ego away, your brain isn't working together like your mosaic, right? Your mosaic is a bunch of individual shards and pieces. And that's, if you take the ego out, that's exactly what your brain is. Your brain's a liar. Your eyes are lying to you. Your sense of smell is lying to you. Your ears are lying to you. It's like, take the ego out of play. And this is what they've discovered, in clinical trials, et cetera. All of a sudden, you're left with just conflicting information. That's what those hallucinations are. They are your body's inability to process the input coming in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so you're right. It's like, in reality, we're not one piece, right? We're just tiny little fractures and fractures and fractures. It's sort of like a fungus. A fungus is comprised of billions of hyphae. Yeah. Individual hyphae that knit together to create a mushroom. That mushroom that you see, that supposedly solid object, is literally stitched together with tiny, tiny, tiny hollow filaments.
Wow. Gives me new appreciation for it.
Yeah, so, it's insane. It's nuts. You're looking at this thing and you're like, okay, this fungus is the size of my head, and it's literally made of monofilament.
Yeah. I don't know, Jesse, you've been blowing my mind all morning so far. So in the last couple of minutes that we have here, if there is a mission statement for Jesse and the Humble Fungus, what is it? Distill it down to me in the simplest terms as possible.
I want to bring mushrooms to the masses. If you haven't had mushrooms, if you haven't tried eating mushrooms or medicinal mushrooms or shiitake or anything else like that, I want you to try it. If you haven't tried growing them, try it. If you haven't tried planting them in your garden to help your plants, I just want you to try it. Like, even if you don't love it, just give it a try, because it is cool as hell.
I don't think I could say that even better. that's it.
That's
it. That's a value prop. I see that.
I wish I could put that on my business cards, like, just cool as hell.
I mean, you could. That might be another one of those little life lessons, though. Something about market permanence and whatever. So thank you so much, Jesse. I've appreciated this immensely. I mean, you're humble. Like, I'll repeat it back. I mean, your humbleness, your approach to life, your approach to taking something as humble as fungus and playing with your headset at the same time, taking something as simple as a fungus and turning that into truly a life lesson for all of us, I think is hugely important. And, I wish you luck. I'm going to order my own kit because I think that's pretty awesome. I actually like mushrooms. I like eating them. They are, to me, amazing. So I'm going to give it a shot. I urge everybody else that's listening to this to give it a shot too. And we'll make sure they all know about you.
Awesome. Thank you. And
I appreciate it.
Was great talking to you. And
yeah, likewise,
I appreciate it too.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to other conversations about stuff as well in the future. So until then,
we can ramble for days.
Yeah, I can tell. There's a lot of passion tied up in that. Yeah. So I will let you go on that one. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.